All right, so in this video, we're going to see the reverse trend of the chapter. Without the chapter, we've seen Europeans conquer. In this section, we're going to see Europeans overthrown. But even though they're overthrown, it's not going to improve the economic situation in Latin America. Latin America is Central and South America. Now, before we get to the revolutions that overthrew mainly the Spanish, because they had most of the New World because of the Treaty of Tordesillas from earlier in the school year, we got to set up the society that existed in Latin America. On top of the society, you had the Peninsulares. These are government officials from Spain and Portugal that are from the Iberian Peninsula. So they are from Spain. They live in Latin America temporarily, running the colonies on behalf of the Spanish government. Right? But Latin America is not their home. They're just here temporarily. Beneath them, you have the Creoles. The Creoles are full-blooded Spanish, but Latin America is their home. Right? They're born and raised in Latin America is their home. They're of pure Spanish descent, but Latin America is their home. And then you have the Mestitos. The Mestitos are people of mixed Spanish and native descent, native Latin American descent. So they rank lower than the Creoles. Right? And eventually in the 1800s, there are revolts throughout South America. Right? And the reason why is you have multiple influences and then one revolution that kind of provides cover. The American and French Revolution provide the example. You had the American Revolution, of course, overthrowing the British, and you had many Latin Americans that want to overthrow the Spanish. And then the French Revolution is another revolution of the people that overthrew the elite. So these two kind of inspired Latin American revolutionaries. And then the Napoleonic Wars provide the opportunity to rebel because the Napoleonic Wars weakened Spain and Portugal enough that Latin America can actually rebel. Right? So you have multiple revolutions led by San Martin and Bolivar throughout Latin America. They lead rebellions against the Spanish. So Venezuela becomes free, Argentina becomes free, Peru becomes free. One country after another overthrows Spanish control. But eventually Napoleon, of course, is overthrown in Europe, and that leads to the Concert of Europe. Remember, the Concert of Europe, they wanted to put everything back the way it was before Napoleon, which would mean restoring Spanish control to Latin America. Now, that did not happen for two reasons. One reason is Britain. Britain would not allow that because Britain was already trading with the brand new Latin American countries and making a lot of money off of it. And for the continent of Europe to restore Spanish control, they would have to come across the Atlantic, and Britain controls the seas. Britain has the best navy. They're not going to allow them to do that. Also, the United States issued the Monroe Doctrine, named after our president at the time. The United States told Europe that anything that happens in Latin America, that is under the American sphere of influence. It's our business and not theirs. Stay out. Now, which one scared the Europeans the most, the threat of Britain or the threat of the United States? Probably the threat of Britain. But this was still an important moment in U.S. history where we were defying the traditional powers, saying, no, this is our area of the world. Y'all stay over in Europe, but anything that happens in Latin America, that is U.S. interest. So between the threat of Britain and the threat of the United States, Spain does not regain control of Latin America. But it turns out revolution is the easy part. Creating new nations in which everyone feels like they have a fair deal, that is the difficult part. Because your textbook says that Latin America comes under economic imperialism. They're not outright conquered like Africa and Southeast Asia. In fact, they've just had rebellions that freed themselves. But their economy is still ran like their colonies. What that means is the Latin American countries, these brand new countries, they're still exporting their raw goods and importing their finished goods, mainly from Britain, and this leads to very little native industry, which your book called economic imperialism. So their economic system is just like the economic systems that were in the African colonies and the colonies of Southeast Asia. They're still plantation economies where there's a handful of really, really rich people and a majority of poor. So it's really hard to develop this economy. So there's this huge gap between the rich and the poor. You have a handful of rich and the majority are poor, just like you have in other colonies. So even though these countries aren't true colonies, their economies are still ran like it. Now we're going to focus on U.S. influence in Latin America. And we wanted a new country of Panama created. If you look at the map, there's Panama. Now, Panama used to be part of Colombia. But our government managed to persuade the elites in Panama to rebel against Colombia, and we told them that we would support their rebellion because we wanted to build the Panama Canal in Panama. And Colombia wouldn't let us, but if Panama breaks away from Colombia, becomes its own country, and we support that rebellion, in exchange, they will allow us to complete the Panama Canal, which would be the mother of all shortcuts, right? You can see that you would not have to sail around Latin America anymore, all the way around South America. You could just take this shortcut. And because of that, we encourage Panama to rebel against Colombia. It does become its own country. We do build a Panama Canal, right? So that's America actually influencing the politics in another country, which was kind of new for us. Traditionally, we minded our own business. Now we're starting to pay attention and even start revolutions in other countries.